Hello, I'm Corinne Schaefer, and welcome to Create Outside the Box. In this episode, I will be speaking with costume and scenic designer Lukas Waßmann about inclusion, design, and what he sees for the future of theater. If you're interested in watching our conversation, please visit our Creative Operations YouTube channel under the playlist, Create Outside the Box. Lukas Waßmann received his Bachelor of Fine Arts at the HA in Hamburg, Germany, and his Master of Fine Arts from NYU Tisch. Before studying abroad in 2016 at the California State University Long Beach, Lukas assisted in Moscow, Hamburg, Berlin, Vienna, Zurich, and Salzburg in opera, musical, and film. He worked as a costume and scenic designer in California, Luxembourg, Hamburg, Berlin, and in Chemnitz, Germany, where he designed costumes for My Fair Lady and costumes and set for Victoria and Her Hussar, both directed by Eric Peterson. Most recently, he designed Echo in a Diner, This Hair I Tear Is Mine, and Indian Summer, all directed by Jacob Sexton. In addition, he has worked on Hedda Gabler and Much Ado About Nothing with director Rakesh Palisetti. So hello, Lukas, and welcome to Create Outside the Box.
Hi, Corinne. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to talk with me today. A lot of exciting projects coming up, so I'm excited about this conversation. But first off, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we met.
Yes, let's talk about this. Oh, wow. When was that? Was that 2015? 2015 in Hamburg?
It was 2013 was when the production
it was 2013. It was 2013.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, wow. Yeah. Phantom of the Opera in Germany. I used to be the dresser and you were Carlotta and in the ensemble of Phantom of the Opera. Wow. That was definitely a different time in the project we did then. Back then.
Yeah, it was a different time, but it was an exciting time. It was when we first met. And I remember you a lot because you worked with the role of Christine often. And when I was playing Carlotta, we would be in the box together. And I always remember there's like elaborate heavy dresses, like carrying them all around. But just so many wonderful people like yourself that I've met through doing that show and that I'm thankfully still in contact with. So it's a nice little connection. I didn't realize that you had moved to Hamburg to also start studying, and You studied design in Hamburg, but then later you continued your studies in the US. What made you want to study abroad? And also I can imagine that there were different approaches to design in school in Germany and then also in the US. Like what made you want to study abroad and what were some of the differences?
I think the opportunity I took was that I wanted to study abroad in California, in Long Beach, because it was a partner school of my undergrad school in Hamburg, and it was for free. You know, wow. I studied in Hamburg, and because of the connection with the school in California, that I didn't have to pay the huge fee for studying abroad. Other people have to do because if they are not connected with their German school, it's a different situation. And I really said, that's it. That's how I get probably the easiest into the US for a while, where I can really explore and discover new things. And I think at that point, I already like when I actually went to the US, to California, I think I studied already 2 years in Germany. So I already had some ideas and like a feeling for what I want to do or what I want to pursue, or what I really want to try or what I really want to find in California. I grew up with all these TV shows, like also California, and I always thought the idea of going to the US and especially California was always a dream. That this was kind of the bridge for me to realize how schools or education with theater works in the US. Mm-hmm. And I think that there was this one moment in in my lighting design class in California, where I thought, wow, we have electricians here, and we are actually responsible right now as students to light the actors on stage. It felt so professional in an educational environment, and I never felt that professionalism in Germany in schools, because we are just not as connected as theater programs to theaters, to actual spaces, as the US is. And it was always hard in Germany to find collaborators into space, and the school in the US just naturally provided that. It's part of the program. That was a great experience. It was a phenomenal experience. I did lighting design classes, costume design, and scenic design classes. And then when I came back, I think I had 1 more year to study in Germany. Not even, just 1 semester, which is 6 months, or a little less than 6 months. And after that, I started assisting in Berlin as a costume design assistant. And after a year, I said, you know what, Lucas, you should go and do your master's degree. While I was in California, I met a friend in New York, and she showed me NYU, and the specific school, Tisch School of the Arts. And I fell in love with the building. I fell in love with the energy in these rooms. They had a costume shop next to the classrooms. They had scene shops and lighting design group, like light boxes or like black rooms where you can work with light. And it felt like theater camp in New York City. And I said, that's it. That's where I want to spend like 3 years and get another degree on top of my bachelor degree. The very special thing about NYU for me when I started there was that I can actually take scenic design classes, lighting design classes, and have also productions. I am the designer of actual productions. So I thought I have a 1st-year production, a 2nd-year production, 3rd-year production. I'm not missing anything. Like going back to school is not like a gap in my resume. Yeah. It was still. I'm going to school. I'm getting another degree, but I also work professionally with collaborators, with other designers, with directors, dramaturgs, and stage managers. You work so much more closer with stage managers, I feel like, in the US than in Germany. I think it's just a different position in Germany, but yeah, it's been a phenomenal and also humbling experience to be in New York.
Yeah, it's interesting from what you're saying. It sounds like one of the differences was this kind of feeling of because the schools in the US were connected to theater and connected to these larger departments, that even though it was school, you felt like you were on the job, and that it was more professional because of the resources that were available. Did you find other differences in just how they approached things, European versus American? What were they?
I think it's really the way they treated us in school at NYU. They treat us as professional designers. We are not just students there. We come in and it is a job. We're not getting paid for it, but it is a huge experience, a great experience, and a very professional experience. It felt very real. I designed before, so it was not just bachelor and then master. I designed in between, and I designed before, and I never felt like in my previous school that this is how I can be treated, or this is how I can collaborate with other designers or directors. It felt on a completely different level, better, bigger, almost more real and more supportive, because that's how it is outside. That's the way we do productions at NYU. That's how it is outside, and it is interesting. Throughout the last year, I really traveled throughout this country and did different design jobs, and it's funny how they always react to how I do things, and they say, "Oh yeah, you're from NYU. We love that. It's beautiful."
I'm laughing too because you went to California and then you came to New York. And within the United States, there's a little bit of a war between East Coast and West.
Oh, yeah.
So where are you in this war, or are you Switzerland? Are you neutral in this?
No, I'm not neutral, unfortunately. Well, I love big cities. I love big cities. I don't know if you hear all the sirens from the window, but I'm just a beach boy. I'm a beach boy. I love California. I love the sun. I love the summer. And just having the opportunity, even in October or November, going to the beach after you've been to rehearsal, or before rehearsal, just going to the beach. It's beautiful. But on the other side, California doesn't really feel so real to me. Like, as a German, it's like a funny paradise of people living at the beach, and the sun is just shining all the time. It felt unreal, and it was good that it was just 9 months. I think I was there, and I had a great time. I had a fantastic time. I think in a different world or in a different life, I would probably live in California and do theater there. But I also love cities like New York, and New York is just so beautiful. I mean, you know New York so well too. So it's, I guess the biggest difference really is, and that's why I would say, even though I said that I'm a beach boy, Broadway is around the corner in here, and the theater industry just feels different than in California. California obviously more connected to film and Hollywood as well. I always saw myself more in theater. I grew up being a performer. I started doing theater very early on, and always did live performance. Live performance is part of my soul, or of my theater is part of me. And I think film is on so many different levels, different theater. The times you work, right? It's you sometimes makeup artists start at 2 a.m. preparing things for the actors to arrive at like 5 a.m. and then they start shooting at 7. That is not my time.
No.
And then my afternoon is 6 to 8 p.m. I'm when the show is over at 10:30, my day is still not over till 2 a.m. Yeah. And I love that life. It's beautiful. I'm not saying I would never work in film. There are pros and things that are speaking for working in film.
It's just a different industry. It just works.
It is a completely different industry. You're 100% right. even though it is still the same industry with like costume design, scenic production design, actors, performers, managers. It has similar positions.
Yeah.
But it is,
we'll get into some of the differences later. But yeah, there are some, even though it's entertainment, it's kind of set up in a different way, and the costumes are set up in a different way. But you mentioned, that when you were a kid, you were getting into theater because you loved performing. Is that how you got into theater? And is that how you discovered your love of design?
Well, there are two events in my childhood, I would say, that formed me to the person who I am today. And it was this one vacation in Spain with my grandparents where I saw flamenco dancers at the hotel, and I just fell in love with these performers and their costumes. I loved how this woman works with this train of her dress in this hotel, and all these the ruffles on that dress and those dots. It was just so beautiful, and I was obsessed with watching them. And my grandparents noticed that. We talked about this. I know from, they talked to me about this later on again. We talked about this during the vacation, and I think they reached out to my mom afterwards and said that he was really interested in this Spanish and those dancers. I think a year after, or the summer after that summer, I started dancing flamenco as a 5-year-old. And did that for at least 5 years, I believe. Yeah, till I was 10, and then I stopped. And then the other thing is I grew up in Duisburg in Germany, which is a smaller city in the west, or a big city in Western Germany, close to Düsseldorf. That's the city where the first original production of Germany of famous Les Miserables premiered, and my mom brought home a CD one day, and I was listening to the soundtrack, and I came up with these stories in my head about sailors and people who are suffering, and I didn't quite understand what the show was about, but I felt the energy of these sad songs, and I think that made me into this person who just loves theater, musical theater. I love dramatic shows. Those two things definitely started and created the person who I am.
And how did that translate into design? How did that translate into wanting to create the look and feel of the world?
Well, that was actually something my father said to me when I was 18. He said, "Lucas, sure, you can be a performer if you want to do that, but why don't you, before you do that, do something that is a little bit more safer for your future when you're not 20 or 30 anymore? Why don't you learn something like a skill that you can do after you've been a performer for like 30 days or 30 years or something?" And I said, you know what, that's a good idea. We were looking into different things. I think you are that's like the age in Germany, like 16, 17, 18, where you consider doing going to another school, or you're starting another education, try to find something. And I found clothing making for me. Mm-hmm. Industrial clothing making was something that my parents both agreed on. You know what, your grandmother did this, your grandmother is a stitcher, your other grandmother obviously always did like little sewing stuff with you. That could be something you could still do with 50, 60, 70. I was so happy that my mom found this school where they found the school for my brother before, and they also found this department at this school and said, "Lucas, this is it. You should try this." I applied, got in, it was 2018. At that time, it was super easy. I was a young boy, or a young man who got into school for something like this. That they were happy to have people and this department.
Yeah, they were looking for diversity and to.
Yeah, it was very important for them, and I think that's how I got it super easy. I remember that there was like a little test, and I didn't have to sew anything, but they looked into like sketches. They asked me things and what I'm interested in, and I got in, and that's basically the base of my education. Of my costume design.
So as you have gone through, the beginning of your education, continuing your education, designing and putting together shows all along the way, are there different designers that have inspired and influenced you?
So many. And it is interesting, most of them are not German. As I said, I love musical theater, and I think I was 12 or 14 when I had a musical magazine in my hand, and I was reading an article about a show called The Stat, which is based on the Interview with the Vampire. I read the name Susan Hilferty, and I read this name before, and she's the costume designer of the original production of Wicked. She's at that time, she was definitely one of my inspirations. Jan Tax, who is the original costume designer, or the designer of the German musical Elisabeth, and Mozart. He has a very interesting, both of them are very interesting working very interestingly with textures and different shapes of period costumes. And I think that is something I was always interested in for myself as well. I love period costumes. I grew up reading and watching those films about Sissy with Romy Schneider, and I love period and monarchies and queens and kings, and seeing period costumes just turning into something different through modern fabrics or modern shapes within this period silhouette. That is, I would say, why I love these two designers so much. In Germany, I studied in Hamburg, and my teacher, the chair of the department, is Reinhard von der Tann. He's a famous German costume and scenic designer, and throughout my education, I realized that he's aesthetically in a completely different world than I always thought I would go. But it was helpful to learn from someone who has a different aesthetic than what you think your own aesthetic is. And learning and talking about costumes, textures, fabrication, and fabrics is interesting. I love these kind of conversations when you have two different perspectives.
Yeah, it encourages you to stay open and encourages you to continue the conversation and not get so, because I think there is a push basically just from the world to like define ourselves very early, and that can be limiting, right?
Oh, yes.
So if you have people along the way that are kind of challenging you, that also keeps you from kind of putting yourself in this like tight little box of like, okay, this is what I do and this is what I like. So that's very cool. Yeah,
and I think it's true for every job or whatever you do in life. You never stop learning, and that is just so beautiful. And I think when you're younger, you always think, I don't want to go to school anymore. I don't want to learn anymore. I want to do it. I just want to do it. But that's not how it is. It's always a learning process. And I am working on this Columbia University show right now, and I'm learning so much right now, and I'm in a very deep process of getting to know myself again and how I work and how I work with textiles, and I'm also doing the scenic design. And for this kind of festival, it is a workshop. We don't have so much shop support. So I'm really putting my hands on all our materials. My director, Jacob Sexton, he's phenomenal. He always helps me sourcing things and finding solutions. And when I'm in the costume world, he says, you know what, I take care of the scenic things. Just tell me how I should do this. And we're learning together, and we're learning from each other. And it's beautiful. You started saying that part of how you identify your design aesthetic is this, you like the dramatic, you like the period. Is that how you would describe your aesthetic? What is your aesthetic? Yeah, I think I was more referring to what I saw when I was younger, and what led me into this profession, that I was so interested in period costumes or in those textures. But what I need to stay open to, and what I'm reminding myself all the time, is that there is no really an aesthetic. Obviously, people see that see something of your see work and see my work and say, oh yeah, that has similarity to another project you did before, and that is true. There are similar points where you're just leaning towards in designs. But I always say, and I want to say this again, when this question needs to be answered, like I need to design what the show needs to, what the show or what the text provides. I did a Hedda Gabler, a very modern Hedda Gabler at Columbia University last year as well. And I think my aesthetic there was very far away from what I usually do. It was very clean. It was very it was very cool. Like the colors were very it didn't feel warm. And I think that was what my director Rakesh Palisetti and I talked about it back then. This woman is she doesn't have any answers. She is in a weird spot in her life, in a weird situation in her life, and it should feel very cool or cold. And I feel that this design was different to all the other projects I did. And but I think we delivered what that show needed. So I would say that my aesthetic is what the show needs. And when I look back, sometimes I'm on my website and I look back on production photos and I see, oh wow, this looks similar. And then I see there is an aesthetic, there is a Lukas Waßmann kind of like point of view. But it's really hard for me to say what it is. It is probably a very emotional perspective I have, I guess, and that is what forms my design. That makes it so. And I keep learning this. But I got to know this feeling in the US more than in Germany. That this is really it. You are the designer, and you are forming a world. And when your world is upside down and you're designing something, you taking all your emotions into this design and putting this into this, and that forms the design.
Yeah, you're a visual storyteller.
Yes, exactly. Storytelling. That's the word. It's what the show needs to deliver. You have to tell that story. And I feel like because of my school in Germany was also connected to a fashion department, that might have formed me to be more aware of being tasteful and classy. I know that about me too, that I have a specific eye for beauty. But the US formed my design approach into more of the storytelling. It's interesting when we talk about this, and I never really talk about myself about this, or I never really reflect that much about this. But it is interesting that I think I've been very focused on beauty in Germany, or like tastefulness in Germany, and the US made everything dirty and real. And I learned distressing in this country. You cannot believe how many skirts and like hems of skirts I distressed, and that is those two things come together right now. Now that I'm at the end of my school, my schools, and it forms hopefully something for my future, that I can take inspiration or knowledge from both aspects, the beauty and the dirt.
Well, speaking of multiple sides, you are a costume and scenic designer. As you mentioned, you've studied a lot about, production and set design, lighting design, costume, and sometimes you're hired for just costume design. Sometimes you're hired for both. Right now, the production that you're doing at Columbia University, you're doing the costume and the scenic design. When you get to do both, how is that special for you?
It is unlike anything else, really, because if you are the person who is responsible for really creating the whole world, that's magical. I cannot say it differently. I don't want to design only costumes anymore, really. I always want to do 7 costumes. It is more stressful. The responsibility and the pressure is on your shoulders way more than just costume design. You have to dance on multiple weddings at the same time, which is stressful. And some productions can provide assistance, which is phenomenal. But this production right now at Columbia doesn't, because it's really just a festival workshop. But I designed an operetta in Germany this spring with Eric Peterson at the Stadttheater Bremerhaven, and that was the first time I did a show of that size, where I was able to be the costume and the scenic designer, and I was never happier. Really, it really is a very personal achievement to. For me, that I'm getting hired as a costume and scenic designer, and I'm happy that there are directors, producers, and theaters that are trusting me, because I don't have a full degree in scenic design. I'm a costume designer. I just got a degree from in costume design in Germany and the US, but both schools offered, and the US did that more, scenic design classes. So I'm very, very happy that I'm able to do that. And as I said in the beginning, it's you're really forming a whole world. And then in Germany, that's also a difference, and very maybe interesting to you. The lighting designers in Germany are a little different than in the US. In the US, they're most of the time they're really hired guest designers from the outside, not from the theater. And in Germany, it is more common that you are working with the head electrician or the head lighting designer. So this is the person then I work the closest with, director, to form this whole world. That's like the cherry on the top is the lighting, and it makes it always the best. This is a shout out to all the lighting designers out there. It's your set can be as ugly as, or your costumes can be as ugly as whatever. If you have the right lighting designer, and they really know their craft and their skills, everything will look great. So I'm happy that I always can do that, like designing costumes, set, and then I have a little bit of a breathing moment when the lighting designer comes in, finish the magic.
Exactly. And it's interesting because I was thinking before our conversation, it's actually more common than one would think that your costume and either scenic or production designer is the same person. I mean, I think, and sometimes they're their director too. I think of Laurent Pelly, for example. I really love his production of Massenet's Cendrillon, which started off in Santa Fe, but then went to the Metropolitan Opera. And then you've got Catherine Martin, who is the wife of Oz Lerman. We're talking now the film industry. And, if you talk about, I'm just giving two examples, but like from what you're saying, and I totally understand it because I've had a little taste of it myself. When you have the creative control to create a world, it's very hard to go backwards, because you get to just put your imagination out on display. And I can understand that, it would make sense, when you're designing a world, that your costume and your production and your scenic are all tied together. So your world's as cohesive as possible. Yeah.
Everything Baz Luhrmann touches is connected with his wife's design, obviously. Romeo and Juliet, Moulin Rouge, really a movie I was waiting to come to stage since I watched it for the first time, 2001. That aesthetic, and I think that is beautiful to be a production designer and your husband is a director and producer, and you can just live your life together, but also really create these massive productions that are continuously for the rest of the world, for the rest of their lives, really a huge project. Like I'm still looking back to Moulin Rouge and think that is probably one of the best movies I've ever seen. Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio and Romeo and Juliet is also, I didn't understand that movie when I was very young, but when I was older and I understood theater a little better, I was just so in awe with this movie and the design approach. And The Great Gatsby is costume-wise, so beautiful. And if you have that with a collaborator who's your husband, congratulations.
Yeah, I could see it being equal parts amazing and then also at times extremely challenging.
Yes, probably. I haven't made that experience yet, but it's probably also, it can probably also be difficult.
Well, speaking of relationships with directors, when you're working on a project, what are some of the questions and conversations that you have with your director to make sure that when you're designing, that you're all telling the same story?
That's a very good question, Corinne. I think the easiest answer to this is really that if you consider your director as a friend, you can have a real conversation, and then that is a great base, of being collaborators. But sometimes you get paired up for productions, and you don't even have the choice to choose your collaborators and or your directors, and then I guess the biggest challenge is then first to get to know each other. And I think that kind of like relates to the question, what is your aesthetic? But I think everything changed. Like for example, the show Much Ado About Nothing, you've seen with director Rakesh Palisetti, would have been a completely different show with another director. And that goes back to what we talked about so far, really, like personal relationships, feelings, and vibes, I would say, forms design, forms productions. I would just say that this is the first important thing, to find a good connection to your director. And then the questions you can ask, they may vary, because to some directors you just don't have a close connection as well as to other directors, or which is also funny. Sometimes I work with directors who are in 5 productions at the same time, and then we exchange costume sketches, and the director says, "Yeah, cool, Lukas, thank you, looks perfect, let's do that." And then the next time I see the person is when we start rehearsing, and we don't really talk a lot.
Wow.
That happened before, and I have to accept it because we all need to survive. Some jobs pay better, some don't, some not. And if last fall I had 5 productions at the same time as well, and I love when a director knows how to handle this situation. My friend Jacob Sexton, who I work with right now, he always says you have to assume that your costume designer works on at least 3 projects at the same time. So don't bother him with the smallest question like, "Hey, what about the trim at that skirt?" There will be time to talk about questions or exchange information like should we add a trim to these skirts, or should it just be a simpler skirt? And I love when a director finds the right time to ask these questions. But on the flip side, I have to do the same. I have to find the right timing to ask the right questions. And really the right questions when you know that your director is really busy and doesn't have so much time. Then you've really got to nail it and ask all these questions first to yourself, like asking yourself, and then, oh wow, okay, this is a good question, and only the director can answer this.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the point, or one of the points that you're bringing up, is that every project is different, meaning it's got a different dynamic, it's got a different cast of characters. A lot of times when people will start a new show, project, or production, they'll jokingly say first day of school, but it is kind of like the first day of school. You have to okay, are the other kids going to like me? Where do I fit in with the other kids? So there is kind of this social hierarchy and social dynamic. And that's really where emotional intelligence combined with professionalism, where you've gotten to a point where you're saying, okay, let me go through things and edit things first before I have this conversation with someone, because my experience has told me this, right? But it's all that way. And sometimes you'll do a project like, again, we're talking all of these years later after doing Phantom, because for whatever reason, between the creative team and the people at Theater Neue Flora in Hamburg, they brought together a group of really special people that, years later still like to talk to each other. Very rarely about the show that they did, but about what they're doing and just, their creative connections, right? But that, in some ways, is I have the German word in my head, the Ausnahme.
Say it. What did you say?
I don't, Ausnahme. It's the exception, not the rule. When you do get that, you're very lucky, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times it's, just because it's the arts doesn't mean that we don't have some of the same issues that, people in quote unquote regular jobs have, as far as like dynamics and trying to figure out how to collaborate together. Speaking of costumes and building worlds, you are creating a world for people to step into, and that's very transformative. So how do you think costumes specifically are transformative for the people who are playing these roles?
That is a very difficult question to answer, because we can find the answer to this question maybe within ourselves as individuals. I'm just asking you, I'm forming it into a question. When you decided to have this, or when we decided to have this conversation today, you decided to put on this shirt with all these little leaves and flowers on it. It's a black shirt, but it has a lot of colorful organic shapes on it. And what made you choose this shirt this morning or this afternoon? That is a good question, and I could ask that myself, obviously with this shirt, but I could ask this with myself with shirts I pick for an actor. And I'm very lucky that I had a very good conversation last night to my director from Columbia University. We sat on the roof. It was a warm summer night, and we finally had time to sit down, had a slice of pizza, New York slice of pizza, and we went through the fitting photos. And we really took our time, because we are friends. There was no rush, and we really took our time and said and talked about basically every piece. And there was one situation where he asked, "So, why did you choose to give her this one character a brown leather jacket and not a black leather jacket?" And I thought, I think she is not right up there with fashion. I think she is still exploring herself, and I think this brown leather jacket says more insecurity than this black leather jacket, and that is basically what I always think about every piece I'm choosing. For the same character, I gave her a blouse without sleeves, and I asked her, "Can you please tie it in the front? Because I think we need to see more of your skin, and I feel like you're very flirty in that scene. Your character is very flirty and open, very confident. I think this person wants to show off more the body." But then both the actress and we both thought that the fabric of the blouse, because it was a blouse and not like a stretchy t-shirt fabric, it didn't feel, I say poor enough, but it felt too expensive. It felt too expensive. So I said, "You know what? I think I should find a t-shirt for you. I think I should find an old t-shirt for you. It can be the blouse was like white, and the plaid was so small that from afar it looked just gray." I said, "You know what? I'm just going to find a dirty old gray t-shirt, and we cut off the hem, and it's going to be a crop top. That would probably be the right thing." And I took one shirt from stock and showed her what I meant, and she put it on and said, "Yes, this is it. This feels right." The actual fabric of that blouse felt so restricted because it's not stretchy, but the t-shirt was stretchy, and she is physical. She's not in that scene. She's not very physical, but that person, the actress, like the character is not very physical, but the actress is very physical. And she felt so much better and freer. And I think that is those moments when you have these conversations and fittings where you talk, where you have an actor in front of you who's able to talk to you about differences of fabrications and fabrics. That is where the magic really continues and comes together and makes you just leaving the fitting smiling and realizing, wow, we are really good. Putting something together here that feels right. And that is I think how I work, how I love costume design comes together sometimes.
No, you're absolutely right, because different fabrics feel differently. As you said, you move differently in different fabrics. So this actress felt a little bit more restricted in this other more formal fabric that didn't necessarily fit the character. But then there's other times, like if you're doing something period, where there's corsets involved, or there's a weight to the costume, for the actor playing that part, they have to adapt their posture and their way of moving to whatever they're wearing. And so that can be equally as helpful to the actor when finalizing, because again, costumes come later normally in the artistic process, but that can be helpful in finalizing how you're going to be moving as that character. And that's why, oftentimes, depending on what type of show it is, they'll have things like, rehearsal shoes or rehearsal skirts or, hats and canes and gloves to, before the costumes are finished, get the actors to start thinking about these fabrics and start thinking about how they're going to move in these clothes. Because, and then when you add, wigs and makeup, then that's kind of, another cherry on your sundae, of just kind of going, okay, my hair's like this. I feel the weight. I've got a hat. Like, how am I going to move? How do I finalize this? And as a performer, I also find it helpful because when you're wearing the clothes of a character, it helps you disassociate from yourself as an individual. Not that you don't bring aspects of your life to the character that you're playing, trying to ground it in maybe experiences or emotions that you felt. But at some point, it's very important to build someone who stands alone from you. And the costumes and makeup and wigs and all of those things just help you disassociate and see yourself as a completely different person, which is free.
Right.
As you know, one of the earlier episodes, I interviewed Melissa Stanton, who you got to meet when we came to see Much Ado About Nothing. And it's amazing to me, like even on something, you would think, oh, Netflix, they've got a huge budget. They can just do whatever they want. No, like no matter where you are, on Broadway or Netflix or Sony or whoever you're working for, there are budgets. And the fact of the matter is the Emmy Award costume design for Russian Doll was a lot of pieces from H&M that were tailored because they had a restricted budget. And, and they were spending, maybe they would invest in like, a Ralph Lauren coat or something like that. But they weren't just going to all of these, designers. They too had to go, okay, we've got this much money. We're trying to get this mood. We need to, and then we get to a different thing, which we'll talk about a little bit later. With film, you need multiples. Because again, it's a slightly different shooting process. And, so like, what can we afford and afford 5 of, or however many you need. So there's always going to be creative constraints. And unfortunately, a lot of it has to do with money, but that's just
how it is. That's really how it is in every business, I believe. And as I just said, you just have to make it work. Yeah. And I think that's a skill set. I think it is if you as a designer know how to create period costumes out of modern clothes and make it work, you have to make it work, and you just have one piece that is very period looking, or you were lucky enough to find it in stock or on a flea market or a vintage store. You get this, and then you connect it, combine it with other things, and then it will just read for the audience as that period costume, because then there's an opposite of that as well, right? You just have this heavy skirt, this blouse, and then this belt, and it gives already this silhouette, and then the coat that you found maybe that's really looking period, and then the head that's maybe not as period, but it just the whole look creates this full periodness. I'm sorry, I always say periodness, but I think that is a skill, and I'm very happy that I'm always satisfied when that happens to me. I love it's always challenging if you don't have the money, but you just have to make it work. I want to mention this, and that's a dear friend of mine. She's a fashion designer, and I studied abroad with her in California. She creates her own textiles out of completely new things you wouldn't even imagine. She makes it out of, I think, from mushroom. She creates her own leather.
Wow.
Her name is Bea Booker, and she's my idol. I would love to design a show one day, and she could be my we could design it together. I'm doing the storytelling, and she provides the textiles and the forms. That's a dream of mine, really. Because I learned from her that upcycling is in our world just so important.
Yes.
Especially in this city, in New York here, there are so many Salvation Armies or Goodwills and other vintage stores where you can get affordable, good clothing. So there's really no reason for you if you live in a city like New York to rely on internet, like Amazon, or you don't have to go to H&M.
No.
Find cheaper T-shirts or cheaper pants in other places, and I am hoping that I can do this in the future. I'm just trying to make my footprint in this world smaller, and I think with upcycling, like taking things from other places where things already exist, I think it's a good thing, and I hope more costume designers do this.
There are all sorts of, constraints, restraints that, you never know why certain choices are being made. But as you mentioned, especially in the last few years, there have been positive changes in the industry. The idea of, doing productions as green as possible. You have, artists like Billie Eilish, who's doing everything, as green as can be, when she's doing her concert tours. And so coming back to, if you can upcycle, if you can think about the textures, if you can, rely and reuse garments so that there's less waste when you're creating things, that's definitely, a positive movement and influence that has been in the entertainment industry recently. And in that same direction, there's also been a big change in the industry for inclusivity, and especially now with casting. And what I wanted to ask you is, when you're doing productions where everyone is represented, and you might have, a non-binary performer performing a role that's traditionally one way or another. How does that affect your approach to designing for that show? Does it open up a lot of creative avenues? Are there certain challenges then that you're working with? How do you adapt your design for this changing, inclusive, creative environment?
I can answer this real quick. There's no difference, really. But I'm saying that to myself because I want to believe it. I want to believe that inclusivity just doesn't change anything about my design process, because we are all humans. We all have the same goal, especially in theater. I think it is very important to remind us that we all just want to put this show on stage, or this film in front of this camera. And I think everyone should be welcome. Mm-hmm. And everyone should be just part of it. But it's unfortunately not as easy as I hope it would be, or how I just want to believe it. It creates, for some people, or in some situations, it creates conversations you usually would not have. And it's important to have these conversations.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I'll give two examples from Two River Theater in Red Bank. The first one being the production that you did the costume design for, Much Ado About Nothing, which was part of their Little Shakespeare program, meaning that the performers involved are still in high school, although some of them are going to be very quickly gracing Broadway stages.
Oh my God. I would love to talk about this, really. I just have to mention this. I've never worked with more talented people as young as these students. That was a delight for my future, for my career. I will never forget this. I tell you, and you've seen the show. I spotted a future Meryl Streep. I spotted a future Marlon Brando in this cast. They were phenomenal. I will never forget this experience.
They were phenomenal. Sorry. Yeah, and Shakespeare is not easy. No, it was a phenomenal cast. And what was interesting about that cast is that, you had, some of the actors who were female, who were playing a male role, but were dressed as females. You had non-binary actors portraying non-binary. And what was great is it didn't change anything. It didn't change anything. And then fast forward to, I went to see their production of Three Sisters.
Oh, yes, you saw it.
Yes. And two of the performers were also, again, I don't know exactly how I don't want to misrepresent how they define themselves, but let's just say it was not traditional casting. And again, Chekhov play. So again, you had two actors playing traditionally male roles that would normally not have been in the past cast that way. But again, it didn't distract me. It didn't take away from the story. It didn't take away from the relationships developed on stage. So sometimes it's like you're making a lot about nothing. We were talking about, putting together different productions and costumes for different productions. And what I wanted to ask you, and we kind of alluded to it earlier, is what are the differences between designing for theater and designing for film or TV?
The films I did so far were always smaller projects. Your friend Melissa, right? She did this one big show on Netflix, Russian Doll, right?
She's Russian Doll, and she also worked on Orange is the New Black.
Yeah. Oh, yes, exactly. And it was so interesting to talk to her about stuff like this too, because we were about to see my opening of Much Ado. You know what? You can just hide things in film easier than you can hide them on stage. Okay. Especially in a bigger theater space, in a smaller theater space, like you've seen Much Ado, where you are as an audience member, you're so close to the actors on stage, and you are all around, right? I was sitting on the opposite side, and so this setup of the stage was really not giving me a lot of options to hide some things we were not able to finish. So that is always a nerve-wracking moment for me as a theater designer, like a designer for stage. I did a film last December, and we had this one shot where I said, you know what, we see the father only from the front. So let's put some pins in the back, because that jacket doesn't really look like he would wear it like this. So there were some pins in the back, and then we decided, or I think it was doing the makeup on one of the other actors, and then they shot another part of that scene with the camera from the back.
Oh no!
And I saw the takes afterwards, and so I said to my director, like, we cannot use this. You see the pins there, unless you are able to really Photoshop or video shop or whatever do with this. We cannot use this. This looks really weird. So I made my experience, or I had my experiences with the differences in film and theater, and I came to the conclusion that it's easier to do theater shows sometimes, and where you can always go back and alter things. But once it is on camera, you cannot really, as a costume designer, you have no control and power anymore. And that is a control and power I'm missing when I do film.
What's interesting to me, at least what I've witnessed myself in doing theater, but then also seeing, for example, like when I was working on my video projects and renting pieces for that, those pieces were specifically to be rented for either print work or like video and TV work. And the reason behind some of that is that these articles of clothing were not built to withstand the wear and tear of if you're doing an 8-show a week, production. So sometimes with the theater, like you won't see a lot of zippers in theater, a lot of, there's a lot more use of like hook and eye. Because you need to get these things on easily, but also you don't want to be replacing zippers, or having zippers break. So in theater, you won't see that as much. There's more use of either like tearaway or quick changes, which you don't do for like TV or movies. No, you take a nice little break, so there's a different construction for that. And I do know that for like TV and film, again, this idea of like multiples, like especially if you're conveying, someone gets stranded on a desert island, you've got like when they first arrive, and then you've got that shirt as it evolves through however long they're on that island. So it's kind of a different, I would think a completely different process in some ways of like trying to figure out how to construct the clothes to last,
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because that's kind of how we got to know each other too, right? We did live theater, and we stood behind this bed and did this quick change of Carlotta. And isn't that a thrill? I mean, that's a thrill. Minnie Driver didn't have to do that in the Phantom of the Opera movie. She didn't have to do this quick change behind. They did this while the scene was going on, and they can cut and do whatever they want to do. No, and I think that's the thrill. And I think if I really go back to that question, I think that's the reason why I love live theater, or live performances. It's the thrill of you got to make it right in this moment, because the audience is there, they paid, and they want to see the best show possible. Yeah. And we have to deliver. I am a designer I'm always striving to have lots of costumes. I'm trying to provide a wardrobe for a character, even though this one character might have just one scene. I'm pulling 10 dresses and see what fits in for this scene, and then still offer other dresses, even though she just needs one dress. But I want to have this conversation. Like, what do you think your character would have in your wardrobe? And do you think we should have another jacket? Or maybe she comes back in another scene, just walks over the stage for like 5 seconds. That's for me always a moment where I'm thinking, oh yeah, maybe she should have another jacket, and then I'm giving something else and add something. So I'm making. I know that about me. I'm making things sometimes more elaborate, or I don't want to say complicated, but I want to make it bigger than it needs to be, because I think a character is not just one costume and one dress for this one scene. And I think if you have the time and you have the ability to talk to your actor, you can create more than just an outfit for this one.
Yeah.
For this one scene, and I love that. And I always love a good quick change.
Yeah. And I love that you have the conversation with your actors too, because that also can come to editing, because you're thinking design, you're thinking aesthetic. I mean, obviously you're thinking of storytelling. I'll just give like one example, as I did the opera La Boheme. And in the last act, I was playing Musetta. I come in and, Mimi's dying, and I'm dressed in this dress, and I had this ridiculous hat. And it was like, no, I am not wearing this ridiculous hat. If it had been like a normal hat, fine. But like, it was so distracting. You're walking into an extremely dramatic scene with someone dying, and you're wearing this hat that's just going to take all of the attention away from the story and onto the ridiculous hat. So like, for me, it's like, okay, this is, whenever you're doing a show, you want your focus to be where the story is, not on the background person or the background dancer who's got too many sparkles on their hat or whatever. And so the choice was made that I just carried the hat in my hand, so I had it as, a complete look that, this person would have, but not as a big distraction point from the storytelling. And so sometimes you need to see it in the actual work. And then sometimes you have to have the conversation with the actor. And, again, as nice as it would be to always be wearing the most elaborate thing, if it doesn't really fit and takes away, then perhaps, there needs to be some editing or whatnot. And thinking of when you're putting productions together. Every production is different. I mean, sometimes you're building everything from scratch. I mean, that would be something where you had like a really big budget and you could build everything. A lot of times it's a combination of built pieces and bought pieces. Like you said, like sometimes it's going to vintage stores and, you know, collaborating and putting this palette together, this collection together. What are your different processes that you do when you're putting together for different shows?
You are right. It is always goes back to obviously the budget. When you know how much budget you have for a show, you know how much you can do. And it's interesting how this all makes sense in this conversation here today. It goes back to what I said earlier. I think I learned building costumes very early on, and I learned from my teacher when we did productions in Germany or in Austria and Switzerland. We had these marathons of fittings because everything is built. If you put on a show in Salzburg for a festival, you have some money. Being privileged to sketch something and know this is exactly how it will look like, because the costume shop will make sure that they can just get this silhouette right. That is a very beautiful feeling. It is so different though to what I'm doing right now with this Columbia show, because I think my budget currently is the smallest I've ever had for a show, but my director trusts me and says, Lucas, you will still do a good job. It's funny, I sketched this dress, and it goes back to your Labourheim story, this beautiful pink dress for the Lady in Pink. And I was excited when I read this play, and I thought, she's some kind of a magical person. She flies around. What is she? What kind of a fairy tale person is that? And then I gave her this flowy, huge pink dress. I love the sketch. I made 3 different sketches of this dress because I thought, oh, maybe it's that kind of tone, pink tone, or this pink. Ending up using a completely different dress, and it's just completely different now. I'm using a dress, very modern dress that has a 1940s cut, 1950s cut, late 40s, I would say. And I'm adding a train to it, so it becomes a little bit more fairy tale looking, or the energy I felt when I first read the script. So it becomes more that. But it's not anymore that big dress I wanted to build at the beginning, because I don't have the money to find exactly the fabric. Mm-hmm. I don't have shop support that could make this dress for me, so it would mean that I would have to make it. And I would love to do this dress if I have 3 more months and a full plate of other things to do. But those are the moments where you have to adjust and go back and talk to your director, and in this case also playwright. Because I'm lucky enough to have the playwright because it's a new show in the room. And we talked about it, and I said, you know what, I feel like this person should have, even though the scene is kind of set like in 1910 or 1912, I think this person should look more like a 1960s person. Mm. And then it might not make sense right now and hearing this, but in the concept or in the context of the show, to say it makes sense that there's a character coming back towards the end of the show that looks more like from the 1960s. And that is my teaser for all the people in New York to come and see the show. It is very wild, but I had this conversation with the director and the playwright and said, let's change this. This doesn't make sense. It's also distracting, like the Musetta hat. It is distracting, and it shouldn't be that anymore. So I said I had to, as I'm always saying, my designer ego, I have to pull that back and say, you know what, this time around, it's not the time for the stress. And there will be many other opportunities where I can build a big dress like this. But this wasn't the right moment, and we changed it. And going back to your head story, it is very important. I love this moment when you, as a performer, have the option to talk to your costume designer and your director, maybe your wardrobe person, say like, I don't feel like this is the right thing. It distracts me as a performer, and it distracts, I believe it would distract the audience as well. I'm very happy that you said, you know what, I'm just going to hold it in my hand. The costume designer was probably super happy about this, but not every performer is so collaborative as you are. Some are just so frustrated and just say, you know what, I'm throwing this away, and then this head is never going to be on stage again. And you, as a designer, sitting there like, I made this, it took me 6 days to make this head or something, and you were just sad. And then those moments happen, but if you are always open to being a collaborator, you will just see how it's beneficial to just listen sometimes to an actor who says, you know what, this doesn't feel right. And I'm very happy that you were able to say that to about the head.
Switching gears a little bit, you know, you have all of these different projects that you're doing. How do you keep yourself inspired? What inspires you?
My environment. I find inspiration in everything that's around me. I said that in the beginning, like, shout out to all the lighting designers. Light is my biggest inspiration. I'm walking through, or I'm driving the bike through the city sometimes, and just, you know how beautiful New York is, and seeing different facades, like houses that are from the 1890s or the 1920s, next to a building that's from 2010, and how the reflection of the glass facade of the new building reflects on that older facade of the older building, and maybe that building has a window too, and it reflects light to me. Those moments are everything. It's a very funny thing. I live across, like, the parallel street to my street here in Holland, has a place that is such a big scene in the new West Side Story movie. And I've been there last year with my friend Oscar, who's also a scenic designer. He showed me this neighborhood, and we went to the corner, and I said, wow, this looks like, this is my next scenic design for Les Mis. This looks phenomenal. This facade looks, or this facade, or this house looks beautiful. And with costumes, people really, I take, it's a weird thing sometimes, because sometimes I'm looking back to people and I take photos of like a coat I see of a woman, and when I walk behind them or past them on the train, and I see, wow, this is a coat. I love the texture. I have to take a picture of this. And so I'm like always, like, this is me basically going through the world and taking photos all the time, to take inspiration from other people, other things, but basically about my environment. Real life is the best inspiration.
Yeah, I love it too, because what you're doing is you're collecting moments by being present, you know, and I think that that's like a good lesson for all of us, is what beauty can we find when we're present, and we don't take for granted the small moments that make up our day.
I feel like we use that word beautiful so much, but sometimes it's, and that's very true for my life, how beautiful ugliness can be sometimes as well, right? I'm looking on this wall right now outside of my this living room here, and this brick wall, wow, has definitely seen better days. But the ugliness of it is so inspiring and so beautiful. Speaking
of inspiration, where would you like to see theater go? Like, what do you envision for a future theater that you want to be part of?
I think we had some moments today in this conversation where I already felt like it's beautiful that we both, like we as individuals, can talk about something like this and have the same opinion, and think inclusion is something that is should just be so natural. I think that's really what it is. I think that I'm in an age now where I would say I just want people to pursue something that makes them happy, and theater makes me happy. And if I get to meet people as different as possible to me, but in the same time as like being the same, or being similar to what I am or what I pursue, that is really the beauty of theater or to the arts. And I am hopeful that this world just gets it together, and that there will be, hopefully sooner than later, just productions where skin color or gender does really, really not matter to anyone, either the audience members, the actors, the crew, the designers. It's really just not even part of the story. The director I work with currently, Jacob Sexton, he creates an environment, a very, very healthy environment for a very, very diverse group of people around him. We are creating, for a year now, I started working with him last year in November with Evie Mason's show, a play called Echo in a Diner. And we continue these collaborations throughout the year to very, like right now, making sure that our team is very diverse. There was a play we wanted to do in March, we could not do, unfortunately, but Jacob was very, very eager to find a creative team that has a different approach to religion. He was trying to find people who are not believing in religion at all. He wanted to find a Christian costume designer. That was me. The scenic designer was Jewish, and the janitor was Muslim. This is important for me. And there was a great thought. Like, let's start this where at the very start, where the group is finding itself, and it's finding itself with so many different perspectives. We continued that with casting. We had a trans man playing our character, but it was not part of the story, and it wasn't mentioned in the story, but it was important for us to cast this person because he was great, and it was just and that's important. We should cast people, and it doesn't matter where they are, who they are, where they are from, what they are believing in. And that is really what I want for the future, to include everyone, but not make it a topic.
I too look forward to a day where we focus on that and not everything else, but sometimes to elicit change, there has to be some focus so that you are making conscious decisions, because sometimes we get into patterns that need to be shaken up a little bit, or things that are easy. And sometimes we need to make it a little bit more challenging. But what I love is, I really think for the arts moving forward and for storytelling in general, and I've mentioned this in other conversations that I've had, is why wouldn't you want to invite more people to the table from different backgrounds and different cultures and different religions and different experiences? Because that only makes the storytelling and the stories that we create more interesting and more rich and more varied.
It's nurturing, right? Like, this should be the food we take in. This, like, get these. We just live once in this. Like, we are just once on this planet. So let's get all the different angles, perspectives. Let's get them in, and I cannot wait to see more and get to know more people and get to know more perspectives. That's really the essence what it's about. Speaking
of the future, what projects are you excited for that are coming up?
That's a good question. I'm in conversation with some directors for projects that are maybe happening next year. I am very excited to open this project here at Columbia University on Friday, the show called This Hair I Tear Is Mine, written by Evie Mason, directed by Jacob Sexton. That will be, unfortunately, my last project in New York City for a while. I'm going back to Germany in August. The 1st of August is kind of like my first work day in Germany. I will go back and forth between Berlin and Frankfurt for a huge musical tour, a German-speaking international tour. That's kind of what the director and I talked about. So we're going to Austria and Switzerland. And the opening of that is in October. Super excited to do that project. And then I'm going to do another project in February that's really already like super set in my calendar. So these two projects are currently coming up. And then I'm waiting to hear back from another director I worked with. It's talking about a big musical in a regional theater next summer. I talked so much about Les Miserables today. I'm hoping that this will come across rather sooner than later. That was my path when I'm back in Germany. Would love to do that show. So it's still a little open. I think it's very important that directors, producers, theaters know that I'm back in Germany from August on. That is something I kind of will focus on to network and connect and say, hey, you all, I'm back. And just hope that it just comes super naturally. It's funny, I'm never too shy to do a big opera, scenic and costume design, and then just go back to do a university production somewhere. I think it's very important to jump back and forth and not just stay in the big opera houses or big musical theater houses, because then you just think that's what it is, but someday you just might not have this opportunity. So I'm currently on this path to make my future, or to be more open for the future and what's coming. And I think we talk so much about film, so when I live in Berlin, I'm super open. Hopefully I can design some films as well.
Well, if people want to find more about you and your work and your future projects, where should they look for you?
You know what? I have all these social media places that we all have. I have Instagram. My account is Lukas Waßmann Design. Lukas Waßmann Design. I should start pronouncing my name German again.
Yeah.
Didn't really do that in the last 4 years. Yeah, Lukas Waßmann Design on Instagram. I'm on Facebook too. On my website, Lukas Waßmann Design as well. Those are the three things, three places where I'm posting a lot about my work. I'm very eager and excited to update this always, or as soon as possible, or as often as possible. And what I should say also, I always wanted to be a teacher. I'm looking forward to be a teacher at some point. So if there are young costume designers or young striving theater people out there listening to this, please don't hesitate to reach out. If this interview or this conversation or this what we did here today did not answer the questions you have, please reach out and don't be shy. Ask me whatever you want to ask. I think it's we all are in this together, and as I said before, working on this Much Ado production with these students and seeing how really young students can be so connected with theater and connected with themselves to challenge and to portray a Shakespearean character on stage. That really blew my mind, and if I can do anything to comfort young designers that are looking forward to be in theater or in film, please be my guest. Reach out, ask me anything you want.
Oh, that's amazing. I'll include all of the contact information in the notes for this conversation. And I just want to say thank you so much
for taking the time.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Create Outside the Box. Please subscribe, rate, and share our podcast. You can listen to Create Outside the Box on Spotify, Buzzsprout, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. Check us out on our Creative Operations YouTube channel, where you can subscribe to watch our interviews. You can find and follow Creative Operations on our Facebook page and on Instagram at @CO_Creative Operations. For more information about creative operations, please visit www.creative-operations.org.